Hello, welcome to another Jumpstart lecture. My name is Chris Thompson. I'm the executive director here, once again, for now, at Generator. And tonight's going to be a special and an experimental night. So, in the art world, there's the sort of public discussions you have, and then often artists, we were just talking about this a minute ago, artists will get together at a bar afterwards, and then you'll have the real discussion about how things are, you know what's going on and all that sort of stuff. And so we're going to try to have that discussion, a version of that discussion, with just 40 of our other best friends around at the bar with us. So if that works. This is an experiment. And the way I'm proposing to do the format is each of us will, and I'll actually do this too at the beginning. Each of us will give a little background on ourselves, and we'll, as we go along, or at the end, we'll give a couple things we learned about the way the contemporary art world works that we didn't really expect, or was different than we thought. It's kind of a surprise, right? With the overall idea that at the end of this, people should have some real suggestions about how they, can be successful as a contemporary artist. That sound good? Sure. Okay. So I'm going to start. Okay, so my background a little bit is I always intended to be an artist as a kid, and I did what every artist does, because learning point number one is, an art career is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so everybody has a day job. Let's just be, unless you're a college professor, in which case you've got it made. Okay, but so anyway, get your day job, and so I did whatever it took to sort of get by as best I could. And I woke up a while later, and I discovered I was an executive at a company. I had 12 engineers working for me and running a $30-something million a year e-commerce site, which was not what I intended, right? So that's lesson number two. Be careful what you choose for your day job, because you can take over. And but also, and some artists will choose, they'll choose something like graphic design, which is similar to art. And some people say, I don't want to do anything like that. I am going to work for UPS wearing the brown coveralls, and that's what I'm going to do. Anyway, so I woke up and I was like, oh, okay, I meant to be an artist. So I quit my day job, which people thought was crazy at the time, and to become an artist. And I was lucky enough to fall in with folks over at BCA, and through a series of different things, I ended up being curator there for a number of years and that sort of thing. And what happened, though, was in between those two things, when I decided I was going to be an artist, I came from a business background. So I said, okay, what do they teach in grad school? An MFA, they teach you how to be a successful artist and how to run an art business, of course, right? And so I started looking at MFA programs, and I was like, hey, nobody's teaching that. I was like, what's going on here? How do you actually figure out how to be, the business of art, how does it work? And then I discovered later on that and this might not be true for everybody, but very few programs actually teach that, that occasionally an art professor will identify a student they think really has something special, usually because they do work that's very similar to their own. And they will take them aside, and they will say, here's how the art world works. And they'll unveil all of the secrets of how the art world works. This is talking contemporary art world, of course, and help to launch them the best they can, and maybe introduce them to their gallerist or whatever. So that's it. And so this whole program actually came out of this idea that I think we should have an even playing field. Let's pretend we're having that discussion here, about how the art world really works, so that everybody can sort of, have that shot. So that was the big sort of moment for me, which was like, oh, okay, I'm going to try to unravel this, as I go along. So that's essentially my background. But I have one other learning point I had, which was one of my big surprises was I had ascribed to that kind of, and let's just call it what it is, total bullshit idea that, artists are geniuses, and they sit in their studio, and they hang out all that time, and they send their slides out, and eventually a curator looks and is like, oh my God, this person's a genius, and and everything, they take off, and they're getting all these shows and all that sort of stuff. It turns out that's not true at all. right? The most important thing I learned from the beginning, that was totally surprising was becoming very involved with your local art community, going to openings, doing studio visits, hanging out, going out for beers with your friends who are artists and curators and everything, is essential. That's really, one of the most important things. And it's not this weird nepotism thing like, oh, only connected people, get anywhere. It's not that. It's much more that curators are really busy, right? And other people in the art world are really busy. And, you have to, gatekeepers and other things, you've actually just got to get in front of them. And just by being there and participating in the community and everything is the best way to get out in front of folks. And it's also the way to survive because, as we were telling the Jumpstart cohort back here, wave Jumpstart cohort, we were talking again today about this idea that being an artist is probably one of the most difficult careers you could ever choose. And so you need a posse, you need a support group, you need people who are going to be by you and help you through it because it's not easy. And so by having that social interaction, you actually, at that point, have the support you need to get by, amongst other things. So that's my introduction and my learning. Who wants to go next?
Elliott, because Chris took all of my talking points.
Oh.
No, Elliott, I can go.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to try to riff off of that because it's very similar. So I have been in this business as a curator, let's say, for over 25 years.
By the way, I didn't introduce anybody.
Oh,
my
okay.
God. Oh, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Joan. I'm Heather Farrell. I'm the curator and director of exhibitions at the BCA Center. I've been there about 3 years. And I have been doing, let's say, museum, gallery, the art biz for over 25 years. And a long time ago, I started out as an artist in photography. And I realized, as I was also kind of pursuing art history and volunteering at my university museum, that it's really difficult to be an artist. And it would be much easier to be an art historian and get a job. My mom was not convinced that I would ever have a job, but I did find something. And I also enjoyed curating and hanging out with contemporary artists. So I've been doing this a while, and I've done like every role, which I highly recommend. I mean, it's from the volunteer to the intern to the contract job to educator, registrar, curator, director, someone who pushed around a lot of paper at an administrative level to back to my first passion, being a curator. And I love contemporary art in the community. But it's one of those things where I'm always championing it, but it's also challenging because it does seem somewhat mysterious to what's going on. How does this all work? So in terms of what Chris was saying, I mean, because I basically follow him like 2 positions later on, we'll have a lot of similar insights. I think there's a lot of assumptions sort of made about what a curator does. And the first thing is, like, do you all know what a curator is? And is it the same thing for each institution? Because it's not. That's the first thing. So they don't really teach you this in school. Like, hey, curators can mean different things in different places and different institutions. And we make a lot of assumptions about it. But okay, so are they the gatekeeper? Are they kind of like the Kunsthal, where, hey, we're here to hang whatever you've got to show? Or, hey, I have this great concept, and then, and that's, everyone else does their own thing? Or is it something that is more dialogue-driven, kind of relationship-driven? And you can see there's an emphasis. That's where I go. And so I often find that artists will come in and they just kind of assume they know what I do, what my role is, and they don't take the time to kind of figure it out. And that is something they don't talk to you about. I mean, it seems obvious, but that's one of the first things that I think a mistake that artist might make or an assumption they might make. And it's like, oh yeah, that's great. I'm not really here just to hang that work of art. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So another thing I was thinking about, in addition to like that word networking, I used to hear that a lot as a student. It's like, oh, I'm just about the art. I'm not here about networking and being in here. And it's like, no. Find a different word, whatever word you want or phrase. But it's really, you're building a community of practice, right? You're getting to know the people out there who might be movers and shakers, or they might be emerging like you, but that you can connect with, because so much of it, and yes, Chris is right, you're really busy as a curator. You kind of hear about it from someone or hear about it from someone else. Or I might ask another artist, like, hey, anyone you would recommend in the community that I should be looking at? And it's really interesting, because if you're not in that community, you won't be part of it. I won't know who you are. If I can think of one particular artist who's almost come to every single event and opening we've had, and I just, at this point, I'm like, I got to give him a show. Like, he's just, his work's lovely, but I mean, just by the fact that he knows us, he makes an effort to get to know us. He knows our community. Like, I know who you are. It's not like necessarily a cold call, but, and then there's a lot of other points, but I like to always say that curators aren't all-knowing individuals. Like, it doesn't occur to us or come from up high. We really need that connection with the artist, and it's okay to contact us. It's okay to meet us in person. It's okay to say, hey, I'd love to invite you to my studio, which, by the way, does not have to be a fancy studio. It could be your kitchen table, and look at my work, with the caveat that it's not like, and I need a show, but it's like, I just like some feedback. It's okay to ask that. Now, again, it depends on the curator, right? Because we're not all the same, but you have to go out and make that effort. You have to put that work out, because we are really busy. And that being said, you need to have a really concise kind of message about your work. It's got to be clear. It's got to be visual. I can't even tell you how many proposals I get that have no images, or they're like, oh, I haven't gotten to that yet. I mean, you think it's obvious, but it happens all the time. And you have to kind of like, give me a pitch. What's the work about? Okay, or here, go to my website. Wow, you've just made that really difficult for me. I can hit the click, and then you have like 8 different portfolios. I'm like, okay, great. Now what? Or, hey, BCA, you do this. I think this body of work, my newest body, you should take a look at, or I'd love to hear your feedback on it. So those are a couple of ideas to start with.
Fantastic.
Hi.
Who are you?
I feel like I'm on a game show.
I know.
My name is Sarah O'Donnell. I'm an artist. I'm also pretty heavily involved in nonprofits. The last 5 years or so, I've worked for nonprofits, and now I run one. So I've had a lot of sort of different sides of the art world. I've worked at galleries. I worked at for-profit galleries for quite a number of years before working in nonprofits. So I feel like I've seen a pretty wide range of all the sides of it, both as an artist and as a gallery director, curator, which I'm still not totally comfortable calling myself. But a couple of things when Chris and Elliott reached out to see if I would be interested in participating tonight. I think, the 3 things that surprised me the most as an artist were, being on the gallery side of receiving portfolios and receiving, websites from artists, and just having this like constant deluge of, here's my work, are you interested in my work? And I always encourage people, send us your stuff, we always want to find out what people are working on. But being on the receiving end and realizing that piece of advice that I was always given that I didn't really know how to take which was look into what type of work a venue shows and make sure that it kind of aligns with what you're doing before you send them your work. And I think what really sort of put that piece together for me was I was working at a gallery in Stowe, and they showed a very particular type of work. It was basically like large-scale sculptures, lawn ornaments, you might call them, and abstract painting. And it was really, that was what they showed. And so we would get a lot of Vermont artists, especially coming in and being like, I do these beautiful paintings of barns, and I do these beautiful paintings of cows. And it was sort of like, those are beautiful, but that's not what we show. And if you looked at our website, you would see none of that. And so it just became this sort of, interesting sort of nugget for me, where it was like, okay, as an artist, on the flip side of this, if I'm looking at a venue that I'm interested in showing with or working with, I need to really be objective about my own work and consider sort of like, does this fit with what they're doing? Does it not? And sometimes it's a little hard to tell, and sometimes you just kind of take the risk and go for it anyway. But I think that was a real eye-opener for me. The other thing was how many applications you send out as an artist. I've done hundreds of applications at this point. And I remember when I first finished undergrad, I went to Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, where Chris's daughter went, and graduated. And I remember when I was graduating, someone gave me the advice of like, anyone who's anyone applies to Skowhegan. And Skowhegan is this residency in Maine that's like this magical place where you go and they give you studios and everyone falls in love with each other and some people cheat on their spouses. It's like a whole scene. And I was like 22, probably graduating from college, and somebody told me to apply to Skowhegan. So I applied to Skowhegan. I had no idea how competitive it was. This is an international residency program. I think they accept like 50 people a year. And so I sent my application in, and I sent my application fee in, which was like nothing. It was like $50 or something. And I got rejected. And I was sort of like, I didn't get in? Like, I sent the application, I did the thing. Like, so it was just news to me that like, oh, you're not going to get into everything you apply for. And so that really, I had an interesting experience where years later, probably like 2013 or 2014, I, for a year, applied to something every week. And I think over the course of that year, I had like 100 applications out. And that was the year that I got into 3 things. 2 residencies, and I think one of them was an exhibition. And one of the residencies that I got into it's called BMIS. It's in Nebraska. It's an amazing program. And their acceptance letter actually said 2% of our applicants actually get in. And I was like, oh my God, the math works. I applied to 100 things.
That's 50's magic number. Isn't
Yeah, it was
totally
like,
is.
suddenly rejection became a whole different thing. It was like, okay, you expect rejection.
And you got in the first time, because I've been a juror for BMIS.
Yeah.
And we often would look at proposals and be like, oh, well, we'll wait and see if they really are serious for a second application.
Try again, yeah.
Learning moment.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Apply again
Do
and
not
again
give
and again.
up.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. So basically I got that letter and I was sort of like, I've applied for 100 things. I got into 3. They accept 2%. Like, the math lines up, basically. But it definitely, it made me think a lot about how much you have to put yourself out there and how much rejection, the sting of that, lessens over time. And it just becomes like part of, it's part of doing the business side of things. A good friend of mine had a saying that I loved where she would basically say, if you're not getting 2 rejections a week, you're not working hard enough. And I thought that was brilliant. And so I kind of took that as this is like my new motto, and decided to just, it's like, bring it on, How many rejection letters can I try and get at this point? Because somewhere in there's going to be the acceptance letter, and that's an amazing feeling.
It sounds a little bit like online dating.
Yes, yeah.
You swipe for that. That'd be much better.
Yeah. swipe for acceptances. And then I wrote down my other thing. A big surprise that I found so refreshing was with residencies especially, Bemis especially, even, the Vermont Studio Center, they do a Vermont Artists Week every year, and it's just a residency, a week-long residency for Vermont artists, which you should all be applying to. I was really amazed and delighted at how well we were treated. The residents are valued, and the work you're doing is valued. And at Bemis, it's this giant space. They have multiple warehouses. They will help you make your work. They will help you find materials. They will help you source materials. They'll give you an intern who will be right there with you, who will help you make, whatever it is you're working on. They helped me find a sailboat in the middle of Nebraska. It's wild.
I was wondering where the sailboat came from, by the way.
A really generous sailing club. Yeah, they sail on a pond. But it was just, I had never, my whole experience being an artist had been scrimping and scraping, and, you have to be really resourceful, and you're calling in favors, and you're offering to buy your friends beers if they'll just help you do this thing. And then to actually show up at a place where you are, everything you're doing is supported, and there's a whole support network there for it, was a really positive, amazing feeling. And I think it just really kind of made me feel like, oh my God, we are important. Artists are important. This is new to me. But it just, it gave me a lot of optimism around what it means to be an artist, because it is hard. And it can really, take a long time and a lot of energy just to get something to the point where you even feel comfortable showing it. So to have that kind of support was amazing.
So that's definitely another learning moment, which is residencies. So we're going to also try to piece together what a what an artist, a contemporary artist working in the nonprofit world, what their career looks like. So it sounds like, if we look at the steps, you often go to grad school or undergrad. You do some sort of art school, and then residencies. And residencies are this, would you call them an incubation period, or they're also quite frankly, where you meet a lot of other people who tell you how the world really works.
It's also, I would say, a residency it's time, sometimes money, sometimes they do give a stipend, and it's community and it's space. And so for an artist, that's the recipe, And I feel like that was the first time in my life, I'd gone to art school, I'd gone to graduate school, but all the pressure of school and deadlines and everything was lifted. And at a residency, for the first time in my adult life, I felt free of responsibility. And it was so amazing to be this kind of, in the situation where it was you're just here to make your work. We'll even feed you. Don't even worry about cooking. That makes
I also want to
difference.
add, too, that when you apply for a residency and you get in one, you have to think of the people who are visiting the residency programs and who are jurying on those residency programs. I've curated a lot of shows and met a lot of artists through residency programs. So that's another way to get your work out there that you don't even see. It's kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a really good point, because Elliott used to run an artist residency program. For those of you who don't know, BCA, where both Heather and I worked in, and Elliott actually ran a residency while I was there. We actually, Trey Anastasio from the band Fish would give us their secret barn up on top of a mountain, and we would run a residency program, and that was really an amazing experience. But what did you learn from the residency?
So if you're a Fish fan, anyone working for Fish knows exactly what Fish fans look like. So that would be one thing I learned. One day, I was just working outside, and I heard footsteps coming up this crazy steep driveway, and I looked to my side, and there was a guy wearing brown corduroys, a nice little jacket, tiny little specs, and he was immediately very nervous that he was in this place. And he had traveled from the northernmost point of Quebec to come see the barn where they recorded all. I was so freaked out. I was I'll give you a tour, man, and then you got to walk home. You got to leave right now. This is too weird because Trey is not here. So that was one thing that I learned, how to identify a fish fan.
And by the way, when I would run the jury process for this, if we even smelled fish fan, you weren't going to get in. So
Right. So the more maybe like useful commentary about residencies as far as like what Chris and I would have seen in the jury was that there was always like a dynamic between people participating in the jury selecting the artists, and that dynamic was changing from year to year depending on who was invited to be on the panel. So like it wasn't totally obvious like who would be selected from year to year. What we did notice as a trend is that there were some loud voices, and they always advocated for people that they knew well. So that was kind of like an important cynical thing to know. Like you need to know people that are going to go sit on those juries. We also had a very specific landscape where we were working, and so artists that understood that that landscape was important to our organization would have a advantage. Like people that worked within really insane natural environments seemed to like be good fit sometimes, or sometimes people that worked the total opposite could work, but we just had like dial-up internet, so it wasn't super easy to have very tech-oriented artists. So like understanding the context of that opportunity was really important. Do you have any other questions about that? Because like we're talking at you. Is there anything about a residency maybe I could answer? Because there's so much that went into it. It was like a reality TV show. We had 6 artists every summer, 2 different sessions with 3 artists at a time.
I remember hiding the knives from one.
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah. At one point,
That
I
was
was
something.
pretty certain somebody was going to murder me at night, and like this like particular location looked a lot like The Shining, and we watched The Shining, and it was like not helpful for the community. Yeah. Shoot.
So, and maybe this is for the whole panel, but how long is the average residency? I mean, is it a week, 2 weeks?
Oh, that's a good question. I think because I was like I was a studio manager and working resident, so my job was to make everyone feel super comfortable, very productive, and also just like I worked. I was an artist too, so I understood that there was like a certain flow that people would expect to have, and then a certain boredom that would overtake when things went too long. We started at 2 months for a residency with a stipend of $2,000, and that included a place to sleep, which is a very generous residency. There are not that many like that in the United States. We had a bunch of applicants for that residency, and then we eventually truncated it to 6 weeks. Mostly it was logistical, but it was also just like those extra 2 weeks, people would start going stir crazy. There are 3 artists in a super rural, well, 4 including me, super rural location, and you get to know each other so well, and it's not every single kind of chapter that went swimmingly well. Sometimes people like ended up not liking who they were working alongside, and that was just not fun to ride out. So 6 weeks, I think, was like optimal as far as I could tell. It gives you plenty of time to like forget where you're coming from, forget how many parking tickets you have, or whatever it is. Like you just get into a different headspace because, again, that natural landscape was very different from a lot of the artists that were coming from New York, Philly, Hanoi, where other artists came from, Winnipeg. They were coming from all over the world. Manila, actually, there's another funny story. Dominic got really freaked out. Dominic was from Manila, called Dominic's mom and was like, "Mom, I'm on this mountaintop in Vermont, and nobody else is home, so I'm a little bit like, I need some company." And she was like, "You're on a mountain and you're alone? You got to get off that mountain, Dominic." Because in Manila, like only rebel fighters or bad spirits live on mountains. And she was like, "Get out of there now." And so he like started packing his bag, and then he just drank a bottle of whiskey. He didn't even drink, and he just fell asleep because he was just so freaked out. And it was just like, oh my God. I felt so bad because I was like out partying, and I should have been there holding his hand. He was a great painter. He went to Columbia. He's all over now. So that was that experience for me in my perspective. But I think that jury thing is really an interesting dynamic, that a good organization will have a jury so that individuals are not just choosing their friends. a good organization will change that jury so that it's harder to like just pinpoint exactly what type of art is going to be satisfactory. But trends are always changing in the contemporary art field, so it's like I'm a little bit like restless, so I change what I do a lot, and I don't think it serves me because people want to know like what's my signature, and I have lots of different signatures. But I always respect an artist that just says like, this is what I'm doing, I've been doing this for a long time, and this is what I'm passionate about, and they just like plot. I mean, honestly, my sister is like just making paintings that are subtly changing over like decades. It's not like me, I'll change like every 3 years, and it doesn't really, you can't keep up with the trends that are changing just because like they will change from underneath you, and it doesn't, that trend doesn't care about your style. It really doesn't, and you can try to follow it, but you'll never keep up. So I don't know if that explains restlessness, but what else?
Can you talk about yourself?
Sure. So I work here. I love working here. I help people make creative things all the time here. We make some artwork, and we make some like more advanced technological things or STEM-related things. There's a guy in the metal shop now turning a titanium hammer so that he can help protect people climb rocks safer around Vermont. He's like pulling out all these bad holds. He's like a metallurgist. So like there's a really unusual cross-section of creative people here, and I like that mixing because I've worked for art schools a lot. I teach at Champlain. I taught at the Hartford Art School. I've done little things at UVM, and I love those communities because like artists are always so weird, and the good ones like work really, really hard and usually have unusual stories that like brought them to being creative. So I love that community, but it's also like a very specific slice of life. This place is different because you get all of those weird slices from many different disciplines, and they're all together, which is kind of just fun to participate in. So if any of you are just like visiting here tonight, you should really stick around and check it out a little bit more because it is fun. As an artist, I'm a sculptor, so I make somewhat. I've done like some public work. I made those like lightsaber bright red trees in front of the Hilton on Main Street. I lost money on those. I had all my friends helping me make them. It was really fun, but it was really intense. Making huge stuff is just like not really that smart. It's better to make small things that are super valuable and then get rid of them. What else? As an artist, I love materials. So like, again, this is an interesting place for me because like some painters just fall in love with light and they follow kind of light around the world. And I think I fell in love with materials and I like manipulating them or seeing what they do with like little nudges from me. So that would maybe be the most cohesive through line through all my work that looks very different.
Can I be like totally crass and talk about money?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, how do contemporary artists actually pay the rent? I mean, what are the different, you know, channels that you know, money's flowing through? I mean, you know, what is the model here, the business model for the artist, that is?
Buy a small living unit that's on wheels, a tiny house.
A mobile home. That is a question I've been trying to crack for a very long time. I have pretty much always had a full-time day job. And I tried to do the gig type work for a little while when I was living in Philadelphia. And just really found that it was deeply uncomfortable for me. And maybe that was just like a stability need. And I felt really deeply uncool as an artist for not being able to pull that off. But ultimately it was just, I needed to know there was a paycheck coming. And that I could pay my rent. And, you know, I couldn't make work if I was worried about, like, am I going to survive? So I've always found that, you know, there's the full-time job. And then for me, at least, the studio is this really kind of, like, tough dynamic where it costs money to have one. The type of work that I make, I occasionally sell some of it, but the majority of it is installation, which is people sell them. I don't know how. I never have. And so it's running a business at a loss, basically, is how I've grown to think of it. And some years that's easier to stomach than others. And some, like this past year, I didn't really have a studio. I just moved into a new house. There's really not enough space for a studio. And I actually gave a talk about this at the University of Iowa about 2 years ago, where my relationship to the studio has really changed because of that. I don't think of myself as a studio-based artist. For me, a lot of my work actually ends up being about getting away from the studio and like going for a drive, go just shoot video, go get out of the house. And that's actually where like the ideas start to percolate. So I think it's been a little bit of a blessing and a curse. But I think it's also, it's tough, the business model, like I actually tried to write a business plan at one point for how I was going to be an artist and I was going to make money and I was going to support myself. And I just couldn't figure out the sort of like on-ramp part. Like I kind of feel like I know artists who make a living off their work, but anyone who I know who's able to do that has been doing it for so long and they're so established that they're at a very different point in their career than I am. And the part that I could never figure out, that I'm still trying to figure out, is like that, you're past the introductory phase, you're showing your work, maybe you're getting residencies, maybe you've gone to grad school, but how do you enter into that like phase 4, I don't know what number it would be, and actually be able to quit the day job or like go down to part-time work without a trust fund? That is like the big question, and I think that that's something that a lot of friends of mine who are artists really struggle with, especially like getting now to the age of like having families, wanting to like buy a house, all those things. It's really tough to kind of like juggle that and know how to navigate that. So I don't know if you have an answer. I'm still figuring it out.
I don't, because I decided to be a curator. But I would say that for me, it's kind of a fallacy and an assumption that everyone tells you, hey, to be a really successful artist, you're doing this full time and you're supporting yourself. Where is that written down? And it is such a rare, small percentage of artists who can do that. As you say, they're usually extremely established. And I always think of it as like, becoming a successful actor in Hollywood. It's such a small percentage of people. So why don't you just reframe it? I mean, success as an artist isn't supporting yourself all the time with your work. You have to define that success for yourself. It might be getting the work out, but I think of the exhibition that we have on view right now. We have 2 of them at the BCA Center, and really, I mean, the only people who aren't like teaching or are housewives or running a business are people who are really in retirement, like Serena, like she's 80. Or Sandy, he's 70, and he's asking me, how do I get my paintings out and sell more things? I need to supplement my income. And so I think you have to rethink it and find what works for you in terms of success. And if you are an installation artist, look at things like, okay, is it preparatory drawings? Maybe it's outreach as an educator in schools. Maybe it's that part-time job working in the museum where you're staying connected in the community. Like, what feeds you that keeps your practice going? And I think the hardest thing is, like, we all would love to do what we're passionate about full-time. And it's not that typical. And even when we get it, like, I'm passionate about curating, but sometimes I'm like, I could do it part-time. I could do some other things, it's kind of busy. So, that's where I would say that success, find what success is for you. And then I think if you even look at a plan and say, okay, in the next year, for me to be successful in whatever I'm doing as an artist, I need to do these 3 things and really focus on those 3 things, like applying for a residency, finding a gallerist that you can talk to that might relate and present your work, or finding an alternative way, if you have really tricky, large-scale installations or sculpture, like what else could I do that, that's small and I could turn a profit? That'd be great. We have an artist market, by the way, so.
Yeah, for me, I think a community is really like the key to all of that, because I don't find hanging out with just anyone that appealing. Like, it has to be like an unusual, tenacious, crazy person. So if you're like me, then that's kind of like the only thing that'll keep you going. So when I was going to grad school, like, I was really done with Burlington. Like, I knew everyone that I needed to know. I ran into them even when I didn't want to, wherever I was, and it was really like just suffocating me. And I know some people feel like that sometimes because we live in an amazing town, but it's a small town. And so I just needed to go somewhere else. So I went to grad school. I was still doing these like public things. I was still working for Seven Below. I was commuting to Hartford, Connecticut, and I was so happy about all that like chaos. My car broke down exactly in the middle in Putney, Vermont, trying to commute back up here to work at the Residency. It just broke down in the co-op parking lot. I grabbed some beer and I fell asleep, and I was just like so psyched. I just wasn't in any place at all. I was like drifting. But at the end of that whole experience, I met some people that I never would have imagined becoming friends with in Hartford, that were kind of like this weird tribe of people that were like people in Burlington. Like, you're not in New York, so you're always going to be like kind of aware that you're not in the marketplace, but you're still like really insanely passionate about making artwork or thinking about artwork or just looking at the world a little bit crooked. So meeting those people has really led to all different types of opportunities for me that aren't huge. They're not like, I'm not in the MoMA or anything, but it's just, it makes me feel better knowing that there's another place out there that can kind of support me. I ended up working there, teaching at a school that was full of people that were different from people we would see here, so that was really gratifying. And I didn't really care. I mean, I care about the money because, like, you got to fix the car when it's broken down at the co-op. But at the end of the day, I did wake up, yeah. But and I took the bus back up here. But I think the bottom line is that you got to just like motor, make as much as you can for artwork. Don't store it if you can help it, just like make the work, because that's the thing that actually matters a lot. Try not to get weighed down by it. I have friends that have had storage units for like 10 years, and they have like all these like ritualistic burnings of like giant mammoths that they've made, just because who else is ever going to want that mammoth? You'll hold on to things that you really shouldn't. I just threw away like a couple of big sculptures from grad school that were really ugly, and I loved them so much, but it was like cathartic to do that. But you have to actually like make artwork and have that relationship before you try selling anything. Like, there's no reason that you're going to like be able to magically sell something that fits into the niche of, the trend of the moment. You just have to have a relationship with that work first. And then you need to find the people that are kind of into that too, and they're maybe not going to just be artists. Like, I'm friends with like all these machinists because they really like get into like making a titanium hammer, and I'm like, okay, cool, that's awesome. So that's my 2 cents.
Can I add something
Yeah,
to
please,
that?
go ahead.
So I came up with this idea while we're talking about money, the dirty word. At one point, when I was going through my like heavy application year, I started to realize that my portfolio was a form of currency, and that I was using it to buy opportunities to make more work that would get me more opportunities to make more work. It was this like self-fulfilling prophecy. And once I kind of put that together, it felt like, okay, this is an engine that can feed itself, and maybe it won't feed me and pay my rent, but if I can continue to get opportunities to make the work, that is a really fantastic thing to experience. So.
And by the way, your site, your website, the documentation's beautiful. I mean, it's lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so another learning moment. I mean, often all the curators are going to see is the your documentation, so it's got to be spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe one other thing I would add is I think sometimes, artists are in a position where like, oh my God, I finally got a show, or I'm going to be in a group exhibition, and that's great, and I'm just so grateful. But, you you shouldn't be so grateful. Like, you should say, hey, that's wonderful. I'm so excited. So how can you help support my material costs and my labor? Like, what are you offering in terms of an honorarium? And, you know, if we're going to be frank, with the doors, you know, semi-closed,
Totally open.
is
Yeah, go ahead.
we always have a limited budget, and, you know, I'm not going to overshoot that mark the first time I make an offer, right? I have a budget. I'll say, hey, I can do $1,500 and $500 materials, and, you know, and it's okay to come back and say, wow, that's wonderful, but the project I envision, I need a little bit more than that. Is there any way you could do more? It's okay to ask that. Because often I'll say, sure, if I want to work with you, I'll find out, or I'll meet you halfway.
Absolutely. So yeah, I would, if somebody lowballed, you know, I would be like, wow, I get to do the show. That's fantastic. And you know, and every once in a while you'd be like, oh, I just feel so guilty. I'm going to tell them that was too low. You know.
And sometimes it's not intentional. It's just like, this is my budget, and then they come up with this amazing thing, or it's like, oh, I'm stretching it a little bit, but I'll go search for something else.
But as a curator, you actually have a budget. I mean, you've divided up your year, and you know exactly how much money you've got, you know, and it's kind of like this. It's like a barter negotiation, or like a flea market negotiation. You're like, well, you know, what are you going to offer, you know? But you know exactly what your bottom line is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, who's got a question? We've been talking a lot.
So if I'm making a proposal for an exhibition to a venue, and I know that venues are planning 2 years in advance, so I'm making a proposal for something that's 2 years in advance. So the work that I have in 2 years might not be what I actually have photos of right now. So how do you deal with that dilemma as an artist when you're making a proposal? Do you say, okay, it's going to be this work, and it's completed now, and this is what it looks like? Or is there a way to say, this is my work, and I'm planning this other piece, and it's going to continue from that direction? That's a puzzle to me.
Yes, the latter. Because, and also, too, I mean, again, what I always encourage people is, you know, if there's any way that before you send that proposal for 2 years down the road, and you've done your research online, that you have some other connection with that curator or that coordinator, that's really advantageous. And maybe you've come to the opening and you said, hey, I just want to introduce myself. I'm an artist here in the community. I really love your shows, and I'd love to pitch something to you at some point. And because generally when they do that, I'm like, oh, they're paying attention. They're interested in my organization. They know what we're doing. And I'll usually say, sure, would you like a card? Great. Tell me what you're working about. Be prepared to speak about it. And then, yes, when you get to that point of sending something, it's like, I know that it's going to change, but don't assume that I'm also, another dirty secret, don't necessarily assume that I'm planning 2 and 3 years in advance, because sometimes shit happens. Exactly. Things come up. Artists drop out. Spaces are suddenly available. Things change on the calendar. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Hey, who's that person? I've got that postcard on the wall from 2 years ago. Quick, get him on the phone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have an artist in the exhibition right now, Sandy Sokoloff, who I just had lunch with today, and he's so funny because he said, you know, I don't buy into that whole thing of, you know, networking and pitching your work. And I'm like, Sandy, you sent me your press announcement from the Brattleboro Museum. I'd never heard of you before. You've been off the radar. No one knew who you were. You pitched yourself, and you knew about my organization, and it just so happened when he did that, I needed one other artist in my thematic show, and I needed a Vermont artist, and he, like, it was like a prayer answered from heaven to go with the spirituality theme. I was like, great. So it's, you know, don't make those assumptions, send it out, and we know that it's going to change. But then just get to that first step of letting me know about your work. And then I always say is, instead of saying, go to my website, I'm going to keep saying that, make a connection with me. Say, I really love the show. I mean, we love to be flattered. I really love the show. You know, I love
Heather,
to
you're
hear.
great.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, tell me more. And you know, I'd really love for you to come out sometime and visit me at my studio and just hear your thoughts about it. But if you say, I really want you to come out and decide if you're going to give me an exhibition in 2 years, it's a relationship. I'm like, whoa, let's slow down a little bit. Who are you? Let's have a cup of coffee.
So that's a terrible admission. I got a terrible confession to make. You know, at BCA, I don't know how many shows I did there, but in total, I've probably done over 100 shows at various places I've curated. I've never given a show to somebody just based off of the slides they sent or the package they sent, or, you know, I just never did. You know who I asked? I asked other artists. I talked to other curators. And my one suggestion, I'm going to take another question, but the one suggestion I have also is curators talk to each other. People think this isn't true, but we actually do. In fact, everybody here has been a curator.
All the time.
All the time. So here's my number one suggestion as an artist. Don't be an asshole. Because there's
just had this
nothing the
conversation.
curators like to talk about more than this artist who's been a complete jerk, you know. And I've had artists who are good artists, you know. I've had artists who are, you know, the work is really, really kind of exceptional, who are really difficult. And I have artists who are very good artists, who are a delight to work with. And I always give it to the artist who's a delight to work with. I'm just sorry. And it's human nature, so.
It's totally true. I mean, I still tell stories about artists from 20 years ago that are very internationally known, seen at art fairs, that I'm like, that person was terrible. I would never work with them. Great work, but no. But also to remember curators, other artists, they're going to refer you on to other opportunities that you don't even know about. Crystal Bridges contacted me several months ago and said, hey, we're doing our 50 states, 50 artists, and we need 2 to 3 recommendations of artists that you think we should do studio visits with. Done. And I did it. I can really like the work, but I'm also going to do it for people that were a pleasure to work with, that I think is professional in terms of what they're doing. And Joan Mitchell Foundation or some other foundation could contact you, or someone MacArthur, and then say, hey, can you make a recommendation, or who should we look at? That goes on all the time. And it's not only with curators, it's with other artists. Yeah.
Hi. So this is kind of in line with what you're just talking about, but with residency applications, other than the work itself, what is something that may stand out in the application process?
Maybe you should talk about that. I've never juried a residency.
I think good writing, like compelling writing, actually is really important, and the imagery. So you've done both. You've gotten into good residencies, and it's all about like a cohesive story, like who you are, and written not just like well, but like punchy. Like you actually need to like slap somebody on the face and be like, I'm getting your attention like with literature, not just with whatever. I mean, great images, great writing. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I would say if you can find out anyone else who's been in the residency program, because every residency program is slightly different. So, I mean, some residencies will sit there and say, we want you to really address these 3 questions, or here's what we're looking for. And if you don't do it, like that's the first thing off. Others, it's just like, really, it's a speed process. 30 seconds on a slide. Yeah. Doesn't do it for me. Nope, go on. I don't get it. Doesn't read well. And I've been in ones where, I mean, we're going through so many slides, whether I've been a juror or organizing my own residency program, like I did in Salina Art Center. And so it's just like, look at the image. It's like, oh, that's kind of curious. So what did they say about their project? If you can't succinctly talk about what you're doing in a few sentences with good writing, I'm not going to read 3/4 of a page about your hopes and dreams. What is it about? What moves you? Think about your audience and conveying that.
By the way, just to interrupt Elliott, sorry. But yeah, I mean, artist statements, all they ever did was disappoint me. You know what I mean? It's like, usually the people who wrote really brilliant artist statements also did really brilliant work. And every once in a while, I'd be looking at work I thought was good, and the artist statement, I was just like, oh, I'm not interested in this person anymore.
I'm fairly sure they all lived before 1930.
So there's one more weird detail. Like, you need to know who your competition is. Like, people that make work similar to yours, you need to be competing with them, actually, because in this speed dating thing with the jury, there's like, I remember like it was so hard to like get into this zone with all of our friends that were like on the jury. It's like brutal because like I identified with the artist, and I'm just like, oh shit, yeah, I see that person is making work just like the other person, and we've like labeled it as like sad boy art, you know? And it's just like kind of dismal. But if you make work like other people, you better be making it better than them. And then you don't have to do your own writing. Like, you can get other people to write for you because not exactly like, I don't know how that exactly works, but like I have a friend who's a Puerto Rican artist, and he doesn't write in English perfectly well, and he would just like get the gist down, and then he would process it through his like editors. And that guy's like showing everywhere now.
That's a really good point. I mean, I used to say, even when I was in graduate school, is the best thing you can do is get to know someone who's a writer. And my artist friends, when I decided to go off and do art history and curatorial work, would say, hey, can you do a curatorial intro? Just introduce my work, and I'll send it out, because I can't write about it myself.
Yeah, great writers often get really great deals. Was it Gregory Volk? Remember? He was a person who just started offering to artists to write about their work, and ultimately became a very well-known writer for art in America and all that, just simply because the artists appreciated it so much, you know, that they had this work, and it really made his career just. So if any of you are writers, that's a great option, you know. Questions?
How about challenges?
Yeah.
Anyone's like that, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, Mike, how much of a disadvantage do you think it is to actually live in Vermont and be an artist? Is that a serious impediment to making it? Because, like you said, New York City is such an epicenter of, it seems like, our world.
Don't go to New York. I tried it.
It just seems so isolated here.
It is. I think that's definitely, when I moved to Vermont, I was surprised at how isolated I felt. And I think I had to double down to find my community. And I was able to find those people and sort of figure out, you know, okay, what venues are showing work that's interesting to me, and kind of figure out, you know, there's a lot of art worlds. You have to kind of create your own where you are. And then it's also great to visit other cities and go to shows that are interesting to you, and kind of see what work is happening that isn't happening here, you know. I think that's really important to just broaden your sense of what's out there. But, you know, I think there's trade-offs to being in Vermont. I lived in New York City for, oh my God, I think I lasted 7 months. I went there and it like chewed me up and spit me out. And I had a really hard time feeling like the art world in New York was a space that my version of being an artist would feel comfortable being a part of. And by that I meant it's like, okay, first of all, I need space to make my work, which is at the highest premium in New York City. And so there was no way I was going to be able to afford a studio. And that alone, like, I feel like right up front, it was sort of like, oh, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why am I here? You know, it's like I'm in the place where I can't make work. And I think, you know, there's a lot of mythology around New York City and being an artist, and that New York art market and Chelsea. And I frankly came to the conclusion that I had been sold this version of New York City by my professors who had lived there in the 60s and 70s. And then I went seeking that, and it was no longer there. New York City is not at all what it was, 50 years ago. So
It moved to Philadelphia, and it moved to Berlin. I mean,
Yeah.
essentially, right?
Yeah.
But where's it now? Because both those places are getting expensive.
I don't know. Let's bring it here.
Yeah, totally.
It's in San Francisco. It's in Chicago.
Right.
It's in parts of Seattle.
Well, that guy Dominic who packed his bags and he was trying to get off the mountain to avoid the bad spirits, Dominic had an interesting kind of method for following what was going on in the art world because it was a cultural difference, but all of his friends from the Philippines were obsessed with like trolling the internet to see what was going on in like art all over the place, in Vienna, in Berlin, in San Francisco. Like he was like us, he was working all the time. He's like a Photoshop retoucher and works really, really hard and like cashes his money so that he can do like a residency every couple of years. But he knows everything that's going on because he's just obsessed with the internet. If you're into that, then that can work for you. Like you don't need to be in the center anymore. Like it's actually more advantageous sometimes to not be there and to be in a place that's like way more sane. But I mean, if you can be in New York, like I love being in New York. You can get work as like a fabricator much more easily than here. It's a bigger economy, so if that works, then great. But for many people, it seems really inhumane, especially artists.
And I knew an artist who actually literally would fly in for openings, and he was part of the New York art community, and everybody assumed he lived in New York, but he actually lived outside of New York and would just fly in and go to all the openings and then leave, and he was treated as a New York career artist, and he never was. Other questions?
So I'm really intrigued by the fact that you've been talking so much about networking and getting yourself out there. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, where does talent play into it? Like in terms of quality, when, whether it's somebody being extremely creative or whether it's just incredible technical skill, like how does that fall into the equation for, because I'm like, sometimes you go see that blue squiggle on a white background, and whether it's hanging on a refrigerator or in a boutique or in a gallery, it means very different things. Like I'm just curious how you guys weigh talent, how you go, ooh, that's good. Like that's good when you're talking about excellent artists with bad attitudes versus good artists with great attitudes.
I'm going to try. That's a hard question because it's like, how do you define talent? I mean, but I think for me, quality is always important, and it's going to be different depending on what type of work I'm looking at. Is it an outsider artist? Is it someone who's, bridging some gap between technology and design and et cetera, storytelling? What happens with networking and community is it gets your foot in the door, because it goes back to that thing that, I was saying earlier, is that curators aren't all knowing. How do I know who you are? I don't, unless I've made some connection with the community, and that opens the door to say, hey, come over and look at my work. And then we have a conversation. And then hopefully, I always say is, have a conversation, because sometimes it's really easy. We get nervous, or we're used to critiques where, I've been literally talked at by artists for 45 minutes. And I finally said, that's great. So what can I help you with today? You've got all the, or what would you like me to do? Or would you like a comment? I mean, be thinking about that dialogue that you want to have with whoever you're, like, what do you like about this? What works with this work? And then also, what's the connection you're trying to make? I'm like trying to show my work. I'm trying to sell my work. I would just love for you to give me some feedback, and who are 3 other people or curators that I should meet up with. I know it's not the best fit for BCA Center. You don't do that particular thing. but who do you know? I would love it if you consider introducing me. I've been asked that, and I really respect artists who say, just here's some of my work. Would you look at it? And if you felt comfortable, recommend me for a studio center.
You know, like Duchamp, he like put a urinal on its side, and I think like he knew what would get a rise out of people then. So he knew that like the same thing Donald Trump knows, that like any attention is good attention, and that was, I think, part of his strategy. It was a game. Like he understood the rules of the game. He understood who owned the game, and he basically knew that if he pissed them off, then he would get a ton of attention, and he would be like talked about. Like look at Andy Warhol. He understood the same thing about like celebrity in the United States. Like that was his, Damien Hirst. Like all these artists aren't necessarily like in their studios rendering perfect kind of gradations of like vases and flowers and things. It has nothing to do with that technical skill. It has everything to do with that perceptive kind of ability to understand like who these people are. They're antagonizers at their core, and they know what they want, and they understand like how to like, have the little puppets to make it all happen. There are other artists now that just get by on pure skill. Like I was just talking to a friend about Jenny Saville. Do you remember her? She made these beautiful paintings of like large people, and she just painted like Lucian Freud, and they're beautiful, beautiful paintings. She crushed it just because they're beautiful, weird paintings. So it's kind of more about knowing yourself and knowing how to like brand yourself so that people can ID you. I told you I have too many like signatures to be an easy like category, and I know that doesn't help me, but like whatever, I don't really care that much, but I have some self-awareness. If I need an opportunity, I know which card to play from my little like quiver.
Sorry, you mentioned multiple art worlds before, and I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've been a participant in several what I would think of as different art worlds. I went to undergrad in Philadelphia. I went to graduate school in Ohio. I moved to Vermont after that to go to a residency at the Vermont Studio Center, and then ended up living here for a couple of years, and then left for a year and kind of bounced around. I went to the residency in Nebraska, then I went to LA for the summer, and that's when I moved to New York City, and then back to Vermont. And so each one of those places definitely had its own communities. And I think especially, it helps to be a resident at a residency, because you get a little bit plugged in just by the nature of, the staff will take you out. They'll tell you if there's going to be like a first Friday or something like that. But you start to see, or at least I started to see, the similarities between like Philly, Omaha. There's performance art happening in this sort of like back of a laundromat in Omaha, and I could imagine the same thing happening in Philly. So they're not that disconnected really. And I think just by the nature of my experience, having gone to graduate school in the Midwest, coming from Philadelphia, I felt like the Midwest was so deeply uncool, and I didn't want to be there. But then I actually found that there was really interesting things going on in the art community there, and I had really underestimated it. And the same thing with Vermont. It's not all idyllic paintings. Like there's some really interesting things going on. And I think I feel like there's the core of my art world, which is the community of makers. It's the artists. It's the people who I'm curious about what they're doing, and I want to know kind of what their work is progressing into. And then there's like the quote unquote art world. There's like the big bad art world. And I think I have bought many books about how to navigate that art world, and like now they're all at the Goodwill on Shelburne Road. So it's literally, I dropped them off a couple of days ago. So if you guys want to go check it out, there's a big box of them there. And I think that's maybe the part that I've gotten more comfortable with, this idea that like, the sort of quote unquote art world, the selling, the showing, the networking, all those things that I think I used to think of as like felt dirty. It actually happens surprisingly organically, and like if I sold a photo, and then someone else saw that and called me up and said, hey, I really love that piece. I'd love to buy it. It's sort of like, wow, I didn't have to flail myself in front of a gallery to make that happen. Like it just was sort of like this very natural thing. And I think that idea of like the sort of mythology of like the art world, the New York City art world, the like, galleries that are going through young artists or like making careers, killing careers. You don't have to participate in that, And if you want to, go for it. I'm sure it's a hell of a ride, but like I just had no desire for that. So.
And I think that's a hugely important point, which is that there are tons of different art worlds, and talent, aesthetic, technique, concept has different meanings in each and every one of them. You have to actually, it's a huge point, you have to get to know the art world you want to be part of. So there are lots of galleries that love technique, and I know people who are just very technically good, beautiful painters who make mint. They do great, and they figured out how to navigate that art world. We've actually been, and maybe I didn't introduce this well enough, we've been talking about a very specific art world, which is the nonprofit art space world, essentially, where you don't sell work. It's kind of magic. We were just talking about this today, which is that you can get this thing called a stipend. Like you get a show and they pay you, as Heather was just talking about, to produce work, and the magic is then it's yours at the end. So they've paid you, they've done a show, and then you've got this work that they paid probably thousands of dollars for you to produce that you can then go to a gallery and you can sell individually. That's a very specific world, but it's often very conceptual work, and the reason why it exists is because that work is very hard to sell. So, we're grant funded. Both of us have received an Andy Warhol Foundation grant, which is fantastic. They give you a lot of money and say, make great shows for a couple years. And that's an amazing experience. And we just turn right around and hand it to you guys, and in form of stipends and other things like that. The commercial gallery world is a totally different place. It's a place where you're selling work, and it's really all about the collectors. Having the collectors want to have an experience working with you as an artist, and they collect your work based upon you as a person as much as anything else. So it's a totally different world. Mm-hmm. Has any of you actually deigned to be part of the gallery world? Or you go all
Which gallery world?
Which exactly? That's right. There are tons there every single day. Just one quick. I call something I was mentioning today. Also, is called resume surfing, which is when I find an artist who produces stuff sort of like me, but is a little bit further along than me. I literally just go through their resume and I look at every single gallery, and then I find another artist in that gallery, and I follow, and you do this whole thing and spend weeks doing this, and you come up with those 50 galleries, and you send out, you contact them, but you do this slowly, sort of, getting to know them, sending them cards, stopping by, all this sort of stuff, and and so there are whole ways to navigate that world, but it's a very different, thing than the world we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Should we respond to that? No, I think you put it really well. Most of my experience has been in the nonprofit side of things. I worked in commercial galleries, but didn't feel like it was a good outlet for my work. And just, I think I found the sort of support that I needed to make the work in the nonprofit side of things. So I think it just, it makes sense for some people to just go straight down that route and make work and sell it and continue to support their art career. But it's, and it's not one or the other. They're not mutually exclusive. There's plenty of artists who work with nonprofits and with commercial galleries too.
But I have a question for you both and for everyone here in the audience is, how would you split that time in terms of making art and then doing the research, getting out there, seeing how to get the work out there? Do you want to both answer?
I like nerding out on I'm going to put on my office hat side of making art. And then I realize I'm doing it because I'm procrastinating of actually getting in the studio. and then I feel guilty, and so then I actually get in the studio and start to make the work. So it's kind of this, for me, it's a little bit of like, I always feel guilty that I'm not making enough work. Even when I'm in the studio, it's a weird thing to like, you can't shake it.
For me, it's like part of the work, but what is it, 50-50, 60-40?
I don't know how I would like divide it up. I mean, I've tried even sort of like scheduling my day. So it's like everything before lunch is admin, applications, things like that. Everything after is making work. But ultimately, I would, if I'm working on an application, I get bored and then I get an idea for something, I'm going to go do that thing. So it's tough to kind of break it down, but both are important. But at the end of the day, I think if you're not making work, you don't have that portfolio, you don't have that, the thing to put out into the world that you're trying to pursue. So I think the focus is the work and wanting to really figure out, like, find your voice, ultimately, which just takes time.
I'm more like a people person, so if there's somebody I know that has a cool show, I'll go to that show. That's the way I kind of surf. And like I said, these people that are in my tribe, like all the artists that I think are like me, I just try to keep up with them, go see them as much as I can. I just missed, one of my friends has a show at the Aldrich Museum, and he's like way into like maple sugaring, so in a way he would do great here, and in a way he would just be like every other person in Vermont. But he had this great show. His girlfriend now works at the Aldrich, and he just turned 40, and they were like, come down, like party with us on Friday. And I was like, we work hard here, so I just couldn't do it. And I felt really bad because that was like the time I had to like see what's going on at the Aldrich Museum, see what's going on with my friends. So that's how I just go where my people are.
I just turned it into a game because I'm I got started in the art career so late because of being lost, and so I was like, I'm gonna get a show at the BCA in a year, and I turned it into a total game, and unexpectedly, I did, but the big thing is there was no stress about it because I thought there was not a chance in hell that would ever happen, but I was just like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna do this, so. Do you guys want to do a follow-up, just a closing last thought? Or, sorry.
Final thought. Can someone else go first? Sure. I don't have that.
I think nonprofits are interesting because they actually try really hard to make the humanity in all of us apparent and visible. And I think that that's really, really important, especially now because there's so much strategic effort to divide people. And so like you need the humanities more than ever right now. And nonprofits like Chris, like everyone is saying, are just there to support people realize their vision. So it is a worthwhile community or venue to work with, even if it's not like a commercial gallery where you're making tons of bank.
I think it's worth reiterating something you said earlier, actually, which is that an art career is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And I think, especially, when I was coming out of school, I definitely thought it was a sprint. I thought it was, you got to get famous young and then stay famous. And my sort of sense of how that worked has completely changed because ultimately I want to be making work for the next 50 years, and whether it's just for my own enjoyment or whether I'm making any kind of money at it or, getting any kind of shows out of it. Like, I think it's the more you make your work and the more you build out this sort of lineage for yourself, you can look back at it and actually begin to sort of see the themes and the patterns and feel like, oh, that's what my work is. That's what the signature that you were talking about. For the longest time, I had no idea how to kind of define my work. And then, now I've been making it for 15 years, and I'm starting to see kind of, okay, this looks like my work. But it took a long time, and it'll continue to grow and change. And I think that's a really exciting thing. So, there you go.
I think of two things in the realm of the nonprofit. Is one, it's an important part of your ecosystem as an artist, right? That you have studio time, you have gallery time, but nonprofits are there to help support you, whether it's through these honorariums or special projects or introducing you to other communities, or helping you get a publication that you can then send out to other venues. So they're a useful tool. They're like a team to help support what you do. The second part is they're a source of your audience. You spend so much time in maybe your particular community or in your studio, but I love to think, at least with the BCA, that we're the place where the community can come in and we can kind of connect you with the audience and create a relevancy to your work and maybe hopefully lead to some other new path or new adventure for you in a way that serves you but also serves the community. And for me, that's kind of what it's all about.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. This has been great.
Thanks, everyone.